Racist woman throws black father-in-law into the sea. It's time. My husband needs the inheritance. What happened? Do you really think no one will notice? Walter asked calmly as the cold Atlantic water lapped against his shoulders. At 74, he floated with a dignity that irritated Rebecca more than any cry of despair could. The 35-year-old woman held tight to the wheel of the luxury yacht, her blue eyes shining with a coldness that contrasted brutally with her Californian tan. No one will notice, Walter. Accidents at sea happen every day to people his age. David lay unconscious on the deck, drugged by the sedative Rebecca had slipped into his breakfast. The 38-year-old doctor would never have imagined that his own wife had planned to murder his father for money. And for something even darker. You know what the problem is with people like you? Rebecca continued, revving the engine as Walter struggled to stay afloat. You think you deserve the same things we do. My daughter should never inherit the dirty money of a family like yours. What Rebecca didn't know was that Walter Thompson wasn't just a 74-year-old black man fighting for his life in the ocean. He was the founder of Thompson Industries, one of the largest technology companies on the East Coast, a strategist who had built a $200 million empire from scratch. And in the last 6 months, since discovering his daughter-in-law's true intentions, he had been preparing something that would destroy not only Rebecca, but the entire network of people who supported her. 3 hours earlier, Rebecca had served David the special coffee, waited for him to pass out, and then convinced her father-in-law to take a romantic stroll to celebrate their 5th wedding anniversary. Walter accepted with a smile that she interpreted as senility, but which was actually the calmness of someone who had already planned every move. David will never forgive you for this, Walter said, his arms still cutting through the water with the strength of someone who had swum every day for decades. David won't know anything, Rebecca laughed. He'll wake up, you'll have accidentally fallen off the boat, and I'll be the inconsolable widow who tried everything to save you. The inheritance will be ours, as it always should have been. Walter closed his eyes for a moment, not from exhaustion, but from concentration. In his waterproof pocket, the small emergency device he had activated before boarding the yacht continued to transmit its exact location. Rebecca thought she was carrying out the perfect crime, but in fact she was being filmed by 3 different hidden cameras that Walter had installed on the boat during the week. You know, Rebecca, he said, his voice carrying an authority she had never heard before, there's a difference between being smart and thinking you're smart. For a moment, she hesitated. There was something in her father-in-law's tone of voice that sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the sea breeze. But it was too late for doubts. The plan was in motion, and in a few hours, she would be one of the richest women in California. What Rebecca couldn't imagine was that every racist word, every threat, every second of that attempted murder was being recorded, broadcast, and automatically sent to a list of contacts that included the police, the FBI, the country's major newspapers, and all the members of David's company board. If you are enjoying this story of justice against racism and greed, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what happened next will show that underestimating a man's intelligence because of the color of his skin was the biggest mistake Rebecca could have made in her life. 6 months before that day at the ocean, Walter had stumbled upon the messages on Rebecca's phone by accident. She had left her cell phone on the dining room table during Christmas dinner, and when it rang, Walter just tried to hand it to her. The lit screen showed a group conversation called Problem Solved. I finally convinced David to sign the power of attorney. The old man won't last much longer, and when he dies, all that dirty money will be ours by right, read one of Rebecca's messages. Are you sure he doesn't suspect anything? Replied a contact saved as Lawyer K. Please, he's just another old black man who got lucky in business. David still believes in that happy family nonsense. My daughter should never carry the blood of those people. Walter had screenshotted everything before returning the phone, maintaining the neutral expression he had perfected over decades of building his company in an America that was not always receptive to entrepreneurs like him. The son of a street sweeper and a cleaning lady, he knew how to recognize people's true character beneath their social masks. Over the next few months, Walter watched Rebecca intensify her efforts. She began to interfere in David's medical decisions, suggesting that his father was losing his lucidity and needed more supervision. She convinced David to reduce Walter's visits to his 5-year-old grandson, claiming that the child was confused by cultural differences. It's nothing against your father, she would say to David with crocodile tears. But Tommy is asking strange questions about skin color, and at his school, well, the other families are starting to comment. What hurt Walter most was not the racist lies, but seeing his own son believe them. David, the black boy he had raised to be proud of his roots, now avoided talking about the family in front of his wife and even asked Walter not to mention certain things about the past when Tommy was present. Rebecca had calculated every move with surgical precision. She isolated Walter from David's friends, convinced her son to change his will as a precaution, and even suggested that Walter move to a residence more suitable for his age, a nursing home where he could receive specialized care. But Rebecca made a fatal mistake. She completely underestimated the man who had built a technology empire from scratch. Walter Thompson wasn't just rich, he was strategic. During his years as CEO, he faced racist attacks from competitors, hostile takeover attempts, and smear campaigns that sought to destroy his reputation. He had learned that the best defense against people like Rebecca was to document everything and prepare for the inevitable attack. Over the past 3 months, Walter had quietly hired one of the best criminal law firms in the country, installed recording systems in his own home, and even hired a private investigator to track Rebecca's activities. What he discovered was worse than he had imagined. She had a history of previous relationships with wealthy men, always ending with convenient inheritances and accidental deaths of elderly relatives. Now, floating in the icy ocean as Rebecca sped the yacht away, Walter felt a strange calm. Every racist slur, every threat, every second of that attempted murder was being broadcast live to a room full of authorities he had put on high alert. "Do you know the difference between you and me, Rebecca?" Walter shouted as she pulled away. "You think intelligence has a color. I know that stupidity has many faces, and today the whole world will see yours." Rebecca laughed loudly, turned on the boat's radio, and turned up the music to drown out any cries for help. She couldn't have imagined that at that very moment, her photo was being transmitted in real time to police stations in 3 states, while FBI agents were already on their way to intercept the yacht. For a moment, when the loud music masked her screams and the boat became just a dot on the horizon, everyone watching the live broadcasts thought they would witness a murder. But those who know the true strength built up over decades of adversity know that it grows precisely when it seems most fragile, and that the most devastating revenge is that which turns the enemy's own weapon against them. 3 months after discovering Rebecca's racist messages, Walter was sitting in his private office at 2 a.m. when the phone rang. On the other end of the line, Detective Michelle Santos' voice sounded tense. "Mr. Thompson, we've been able to track her financial activities over the last 5 years. You were right, Rebecca Collins is not who she says she is. We already have evidence of at least 2 similar cases in other states." Walter closed his eyes, feeling a mixture of relief and horror. The investigation he had discreetly begun was revealing that his daughter-in-law was much more dangerous than he had imagined. "Tell me everything, Detective Santos." Richard Morrison, 67, a widower from Phoenix. He died accidentally on a trail after marrying Rebecca 3 years ago. She inherited $1.2 million. Before him, Harold Peterson, 59, from Seattle. Sudden heart attack after signing a new life insurance policy. Rebecca was the beneficiary of another $800,000. Walter had hired Michelle Santos because she was one of the few black detectives who had risen to the top of the department while facing the same prejudices he knew so well. The daughter of Mexican immigrants, she had grown up proving her competence every day, just as Walter had done when building his company. "Mr. Thompson, I need you to understand something," Michelle continued. "Rebecca is calculating and patient. She spends years studying her victims, building trust, isolating them from friends and family. Your son David, he's not just being manipulated, he's being systematically programmed to believe that you are a burden." Over the next few months, Walter discovered how Rebecca had seamlessly infiltrated his family life. She had obsessively researched Thompson Industries, memorized stories about racial prejudice to appear empathetic, and even studied African American culture to feign understanding. Every conversation, every tear, every moment of supposed intimacy had been a carefully rehearsed performance. What hurt Walter the most was seeing how David had been manipulated into feeling ashamed of his own family. Rebecca had planted seeds of insecurity so subtly that David began to question his own childhood memories, believing he had been too privileged and needed to grow up to earn his wife's respect. But Walter Thompson hadn't built a $200 million empire by being passive. While Rebecca believed she was orchestrating the perfect crime, he was setting a trap that would turn her every move against her. "Detective Santos, I need you to install tracking devices on David's yacht. Rebecca is going to try something during our next family trip, I'm sure of it." "Mr. Thompson, that's extremely dangerous. If she suspects anything. She won't suspect anything, Walter interrupted calmly. Rebecca only sees an old black man who got lucky in business. She can't imagine that someone like me could be smarter than her. That prejudice will be her downfall. Walter had learned to use other people's racism as his secret weapon decades ago. When white competitors underestimated his intelligence, he closed deals under the radar. When investors doubted his ability, he bought their failed companies years later. Rebecca was making the same fatal mistake that dozens of people had made before her. In the weeks leading up to the trip, Walter had discreetly installed a complete surveillance system on the yacht. Invisible cameras, long-range microphones, live streaming devices, and even an emergency beacon that would send his exact location to the Coast Guard if activated. More importantly, he had ensured that everything would be transmitted in real time to a control room where Michelle Santos and a team of federal agents would be watching every second. Rebecca thought she was taking Walter on a romantic anniversary trip, but in fact she was heading for her own doom. Rebecca made a crucial mistake, Walter explained to Michelle the night before the trip. She believes that control and intelligence are privileges of white, wealthy people. She can't conceive that someone like me could be 10 steps ahead of her. The emergency device in his pocket was programmed to transmit not only his location, but also high-definition audio and video. Every racist word, every threat, every moment of the attempted murder would be documented with courtroom quality. While Rebecca spent the night before the crime reviewing her perfect plan, Walter was finalizing the last details of the biggest trap of his life. She had spent months believing she was manipulating a helpless old man, unaware that her every move was being anticipated and documented by someone who had faced far more sophisticated predators during decades of business success. What Rebecca would discover in a few hours was that underestimating Walter Thompson's intelligence because of his skin color would be the last mistake she would make as a free woman. On the morning of the trip, when she served David his drugged coffee and smiled sweetly as she invited her father-in-law on the special outing, Walter smiled back, knowing he was about to turn her racist arrogance into her own life sentence. The first indication that something was terribly wrong came when Rebecca heard the sound of helicopters approaching. She looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun, and saw not one, but 3 Coast Guard helicopters flying in formation directly toward her position. "That's not possible," she muttered, desperately accelerating the yacht. "No one knows we're here." Over the boat's radio, which she had left on just to play music, an authoritative voice cut through the transmission. "Rebecca Collins, this is Special Agent Rodriguez of the FBI. You are surrounded. Turn off the engine and remain where you are." Her blood ran cold. The FBI? How on earth did the FBI know her name? She looked frantically around, searching for other boats, trying to understand how she had been discovered so quickly. "Attention, Rebecca Collins," the voice continued. "We have complete recordings of your attempted murder of Walter Thompson. I repeat, turn off the engine immediately." Rebecca felt the world spin. Recordings? Attempted murder? How did they know? And then the terrible truth began to form in her mind. She looked back in the direction where she had left Walter struggling against the waves, and for the first time felt a chill of real fear. 2 kilometers away, Walter Thompson floated calmly, supported by a military emergency buoy that had inflated automatically when he activated the device in his pocket. He wasn't fighting for his life. He was waiting to be rescued, just as planned. "Base, this is Thompson. Operation Justice is underway. The target has taken the bait completely," he said into the nearly invisible microphone on his waterproof necklace. In the Coast Guard control room, Detective Michelle Santos watched 3 different screens showing simultaneous angles of Rebecca's attempted murder. The hidden cameras Walter had installed on the yacht captured every second, the moment she drugged David, every racist word directed at Walter, and most importantly, the exact moment she confessed to killing other men before him. "My God," said one of the technicians, "she actually said she's done this before with 2 other men. It's all on tape." What Rebecca couldn't have imagined was that in the last 10 minutes, as she walked away believing she had committed the perfect crime, every frame of video and every word of her racist confession had been broadcast live not only to the FBI, but to news stations in 3 states. On the yacht, she desperately tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. She picked up the phone, dialed her lawyer, but the call went straight to voicemail. She tried calling the contacts who had helped her with previous crimes, but all the numbers were out of service. What Rebecca didn't know was that Walter had spent the last few months not only documenting her activities, but tracking the entire network of accomplices she used. Detective Santos and his team had coordinated simultaneous arrests in 3 states, completely dismantling Rebecca's operation. "Mrs. Collins," the FBI voice echoed again, "we are broadcasting live to your family and friends through your own social media accounts. Your Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter accounts are being used to show the world who you really are." Rebecca rushed into the yacht's cabin and frantically turned on her phone. Her Instagram page, which normally showed photos of her perfect life with David and Tommy, now displayed a live broadcast of her attempted murder. Over 50,000 people were already watching, and the comments were devastating. "Oh my God, she's a monster. How could she do that to her own father-in-law? Disgusting racist. Call the police." She slid over to Facebook and found the same broadcast. Dozens of David's fellow doctors, neighbors, parents from Tommy's school, they were all commenting, horrified. Her reputation, carefully built over years, was being destroyed in real time. At the hospital where David worked as a surgeon, he had woken up from sedation just as the live stream began. Dr. Harrison, the head of the department, was standing next to his bed with a tablet showing the live stream. "David," the doctor said calmly, "you need to see this. It's about your wife and your father." David watched in horror as the woman he loved revealed herself to be a racist serial killer. Every word she directed at his father, every insult about the color of his skin, every death threat was being broadcast to the entire world. "This can't be," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "She can't be this person. I've lived with her for 5 years." Back out on the ocean, Coast Guard helicopters finally forced Rebecca to stop the yacht. When the agents boarded, she was sitting on the cabin floor, staring at her phone where hundreds of comments continued to appear. "Rebecca Collins," said Agent Rodriguez, "you are under arrest for the murders of Richard Morrison and Harold Peterson, as well as the attempted murder of Walter Thompson. You can't prove anything." She shouted, finally coming back to life. "He fell. It was an accident." The agent smiled coldly and showed her a tablet. "We have 2 hours of footage where you confess in detail how you killed 2 men, how you drugged your husband, and how you planned to murder a 74-year-old man for money and racism. Oh, and we also have 200,000 people watching live who disagree with your version." While Rebecca was being handcuffed, Walter's rescue was being completed a few miles away. A Coast Guard helicopter had lowered a rope, and paramedics were checking his vital signs. Perfect, as expected for someone who had been swimming 5 kilometers a day for decades. "Mr. Thompson," said the paramedic, "are you okay? You may have swallowed some seawater." Walter smiled, adjusting the thermal blanket around his shoulders. "I'm fine, young man. Better than I've been in months. I can finally breathe easy knowing my family is safe." In the control room, Detective Santos received a call from the FBI director in Washington. "Santos, what kind of operation was that? We're getting calls from journalists all over the country." "Sir, we just dismantled a 5-year-old murder ring. Walter Thompson gave us not only Rebecca Collins, but evidence that will reopen investigations into accidental deaths in multiple states." As the helicopter carried Walter back to dry land, he took one last look at the yacht where Rebecca was being arrested. He felt no anger or desire for revenge, just the quiet satisfaction of someone who had protected his family using the same tools that had built his empire: intelligence, patience, and the ability to turn others' prejudice into his own weapon. At the hospital, David was being comforted by colleagues who had watched the broadcast. 5-year-old Tommy was safe at David's maternal grandparents' house, shielded from knowing that his mother had tried to murder the grandfather he adored. "Dr. Foster," said a nurse, "your father is arriving by helicopter. He's fine, just needs observation." David rushed to the helipad, where Walter calmly stepped out of the rescue helicopter, smiling at the son he had almost lost to the manipulation of a murderer. "Dad," David cried, hugging Walter tightly, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I never imagined." "I know, son," Walter replied softly, "but now you know. And now our family can finally be a real family." As father and son embraced on the hospital helipad, Rebecca was being transported in a prison van, handcuffed and wearing an orange uniform. Through the window, she saw the city's electronic billboards already displaying headlines about her arrest: "Racist murderer arrested live," and "FBI dismantles murder network." Her last text message, sent automatically to all her contacts before her phone was confiscated, was the live broadcast of her own confession, a final gift from Walter Thompson, ensuring that even those who didn't watch live would know exactly who she really was. In her police cell, Rebecca finally understood the full extent of her ruin. Not only would she be tried for multiple murders, but her destruction had been broadcast live to hundreds of thousands of people. Her face was being associated with racism and murder on social media, in newspapers, and on national television. What she couldn't have imagined was that Walter had orchestrated not only her arrest, but her complete social destruction. Every person she had tried to impress, every social circle she had tried to belong to, now knew exactly who she was. The future she had tried to build on the bodies of innocent men had disappeared in a single afternoon at sea, broadcast live to the entire world. And in her cell, alone for the first time in years without a victim to manipulate or a plan to execute, Rebecca Collins finally understood that she had completely underestimated the man she believed she could murder simply because he was black and elderly. That mistake would be the last she would make as a free woman. A year later, Walter Thompson sat on the porch of his renovated home, watching Tommy play in the garden while David prepared the Sunday barbecue. The 6-year-old ran freely, unburdened by the racist lies Rebecca had tried to plant in his mind. "Grandpa, tell me again how you swam with the sharks," Tommy shouted, climbing onto Walter's lap with boundless energy. David smiled, serving cold lemonade. "Dad, I still can't believe you planned all that." Rebecca thought she was fooling a helpless old man. "She only saw the color of my skin and my age," Walter replied calmly. "She never bothered to get to know the man behind it. That was her fatal mistake." Rebecca Collins had been sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The trial was broadcast nationally, turning her into a symbol of the racist cruelty that the United States still faced. The evidence Walter had gathered was so devastating that even the best legal team in the country couldn't mount a plausible defense. More importantly, the investigation she had triggered led to the reopening of dozens of accidental death cases involving elderly people with significant inheritances. Detective Santos had been promoted to head of the department after leading the operation that dismantled an entire network of financial predators. At the hospital where David worked, he now led a revolutionary program to detect elder abuse, using the investigative techniques he had learned by observing his own father. His lectures on the signs of psychological manipulation saved hundreds of families from similar destruction. "Do you know what the best part of this whole story was?" Walter asked David as Tommy napped on his lap. "The fact that you survived?" "No," Walter smiled. "It was seeing you discover who you really are. Rebecca tried to make you ashamed of being my son. Now you understand that our family is our strength, not our weakness." Thompson Industries had donated $50 million to foundations fighting racism, establishing educational programs that used Walter's own story as an example that intelligence and determination have no color. Rebecca, in her solitary cell, still received daily hate mail from people who had watched her confession live. Her attempt to kill a man out of racism and greed had turned into a national lesson on the dangers of prejudice. On Walter's last visit to court for the final trial, he had looked directly at Rebecca and said, "You tried to kill me because you thought I was just an unimportant old black man. Now the whole world knows exactly who we both are." Rebecca's legacy would be forever linked to cruelty and racism. Walter's, to the intelligence that turns injustice into justice. As the sun set over the house filled with family laughter, Walter understood that the best revenge was never to destroy Rebecca. It was to build a stronger family and a world more aware of the dangers that people like her represent. If you were moved by this story of justice against racism, subscribe to the channel for more stories that show how intelligence always wins over prejudice, and how sometimes karma needs a little help from those who know how to plan the perfect revenge.